In this video, I will do an introduction to Android app widgets. So what is app widgets? App widgets are miniature application views that can be embedded in other applications such as the home screen and receive periodic updates. These views are referred to as widgets in the user interface, and you can publish one with an app widget provider. An application component that's able to hold other app widgets is called an app widget host, and the screenshot below shows the music app widget. So this is an example of an app widget, and if you go to the developer's website and you go to this specific site, this is a very nice web page that you can go through, and it basically gives you everything that you need to know about Android app widgets. So if we quickly have a look at a phone, I can go to this Android virtual device, hold down on it, and I'll be able to select widgets there. So these are the widgets we're talking about. There's an example on the website of how a widget could look like. And you've also got some examples here. For example, you can get an email widget, or maybe a contact widget, or time widget, or Google Now type of widget, maybe a map, messaging, and so forth that is pre-installed on the devices. So this is a widget. So I see a picture of the widget there, and then I can just hold down and drag the widget and leave it on the home screen. And now it's something small that gives me information about the application. Sometimes people just create normal widgets without basically using an application with it. Okay, so this is app widgets then. And if you scroll down a bit, they give you information about the basics. How do you declare the app widget in the manifest? Adding some metadata and everything about that metadata. And if you scroll down to creating the app widget layout, and that is how your specific widget will basically look like, you'll see that they give you some app widget design guidelines there in the link. So make sure that you go through that app widget design guidelines. If you look at this heading, creating the app widget layout, you'll also see that you can only use the following layout classes with widgets, and that's the frame layout, the linear layout, the relative layout, and the grid layout. You cannot use any other layouts. And you can also use the following widget classes. Now, if we talk about widget classes, just quickly go to Android Studio. These are the widgets that I can drag to let's say my main activity XML. We're talking about these widgets like the button and the toggle button and whatever, the edit texts and so forth. It's those widgets that we're talking about. So only the following widgets can be used on a widget, on a normal app widget, which is the analog clock, the button, the chronometer, the image button, the image view, the progress bar, the text view, the view flipper, list view, grid view, stack view, and then the adaptive view flipper. And descendants of these classes are not supported. So this is basically the only things you can use, the only layouts you can use, and the only widget classes that you can use when developing your own layout for that specific widget. Then also adding margins to app widgets. I suggest that you go through this part as well. We should add some margins to our widgets. And then you can go down, you can see there's using the app widget provider class. So we're going to look at that app widget provider class now, and there's some explanations on every single one of the methods that can be called inside of that class. And then if you go down a bit more, you'll see that you'll get to a heading called creating an app widget configuration activity. So this is also an important one that you need to go through. We'll quickly have a look at it in Android Studio when we create a new simple, very simple widget. We will see the Android widget configuration activity. So this activity is basically just a configuration activity that runs right at the start when you basically drag your widget to the home screen. This activity will pop up and ask the user for some configurations. So you can go through the rest of this web page. You'll see that setting a preview image and so forth. We're going to look at that now. But there's so many things that you can run through here, and some examples that they give you and so forth. So make sure that you go to this developer website, developer.android.com, and go and have a look at app widgets there. Okay, so in the Android application, which is this one now, I've just created a blank application. There's nothing to it. It's really just a blank application. So if I want to add a widget to any one of my applications, I can do so very easily. So let's say this is the application we've got and we want to add a new widget now. So we'll go and right click there and say new, and if you go down to widget at the bottom, we can choose the app widget. So if you choose app widget, you'll get to this screen. Let me just resize the screen quickly. Okay, so it's not resizable, but in any case, there's the class name, and I'm just going to leave it as new app widget. You can give your widget a name there. It could be anything. So you can give your widget a name, and then the placement, you can choose there the home screen and key guard, home screen only or key guard only. So I'm going to go with only the home screen, and then you can set it resizable, and we're going to talk about resizable now, horizontally and vertically, or only horizontally or only vertically, or the user can't resize it. So it's up to you what you want to do here. And normally we would say horizontally and vertically. And then the minimum width in cells, also up to you what you want to do there. And then there's a choice of a configuration screen or not a configuration screen. So if your application needs to maybe, let's say we're talking about a widget that displays news. So let's say the user then will, if you select configuration screen there, it means that the user will probably then, in this example, get a configuration screen where he will need to choose the type of news that he wants on the widget. For example, he could get financial views or news on the widget. He could get some sport news, or maybe world news, or only his specific countries news, or whatever. So then you can basically get a configuration screen where you ask the user what type of data should be displayed on the widget. And then depending on what the user said in the configuration screen, you show him the specific information on the widget. Okay, so for now, I'm going to choose the configuration screen. In the next video that I'm going to do, I'm going to leave out the configuration screen. So let's just choose the configuration screen so that you can see basically what's happening there. And then I'm going to click on finish. And then it creates a lot of coding for you automatically. So let's just quickly step through what happened now when we created this new app widget. The first thing is in the manifest file, you'll see that there's a few things that happened now. You'll see that there's the main activity, there's a new receiver tag, and there's a new activity tag. Now, because we said that we want to have that configuration activity, that activity was created for us automatically with the name new app widget configure activity, and you'll see it's part of your classes there as well. So there's an activity called new app widget configure activity, and that's the activity that will run basically as soon as I drag a widget. So if I go to widgets again, let's say I'm dragging, let's just go with the time one again. If I drag this widget, as soon as I leave it there, it will pop up that configuration activity. So obviously this time widget here does not have a configuration activity. Okay, so that's basically this activity that will run. So there's the activity, and you can see the intent filter there is the app widget configure activity. You'll also see the receiver tag there, and in the receiver tag it refers to a new app widget, and this is this class there, new app widget, and the filter there is it's going to listen for an app widget update. So I'm going to talk about that more now. And then there's also metadata, and in this metadata it basically says your app widget provider is defined in the new app widget info XML file. So you'll see if you go to your resources folder, under layout, you'll see there's two layout files now, one for how your widget will look like, and the one for the configuration activity that goes with this one. And then also you'll see there's an extra folder that was created called XML, and if you go into that one, you'll see there's new app widget info that it refers to here in the metadata, new app widget info. Okay, so let's quickly go to the new app widget info. So in the new app widget info, there's a lot of things going on here, and this is the app widget provider. This is basically you can look at this thing as the settings for your widget. So now if you start at the top, you'll see that we've got a tag there, Android configure, that basically points to your configuration activity. So remember, in the manifest file, we said the receiver will be the new app widget. It's going to listen for an app widget update, and your app widget provider will be this. But the activity itself says this one is the app widget configure activity. So again, here we're saying the configure activity should be that activity. Now there's also then an initial key guard layout, but remember we said we only want to have it on the home screen, so we'll actually we'll not be using that one line there, so I can actually just delete it. And then there's an initial layout. So the initial layout there is basically pointing to how your widget will look like. And you'll see it goes to add layout, new app widget. So if we go to add layout and we go to new app widget, there's how my widget's design should look like. So if I double click that, you'll see I've got this, just like designing a normal activity or whatever, you've got this specific XML file where you can design your layout for your widget. And you can see that in your palette you can also use all of those, but remember you can only use those that were specified on the website, otherwise it won't work. So you can drag in all the supported widgets on the left hand side. You can drag in and define or design your layout as you want your widget to look. At this stage, if we run this now, let's just run it quickly. Okay, there you can see the activity is running. So this is just showing the normal activity. But if we go outside now, let's just go to a new screen there, and I hold in, I go to widgets, you'll see there's my basic widget video. So you can see there's a picture there that it's showing, just showing example. And now I drag the widget, and as soon as I leave it, you'll see that the configuration activity pops up. And now I'm basically able to basically type something else there. So let's just say hello world, and then say add widget, and then there's the widget. So you can see this layout is the blue layout with the white text, and that's exactly what we got there. And now the user are able to also resize this widget. We said he's able to resize it vertically and horizontally, and that's exactly what we are able to do. Okay, so that's the widget. Again, I just want to show you quickly. If you go to widgets, you'll see there's a picture there. So we'll come back to this picture now. So I'm going to leave it open there so that we can talk about that picture. But this new app widget is the layout for my widget. This is how my widget will look like. So let's go back to that part. So the initial layout is the layout that we want to have it look like. Then there's a minimum height and a minimum width attribute. And this specifies the minimum amount of space that the app widget consumes by default. So the default home screen positions the app widgets in its window based on a grid of cells that have defined or have a defined height and width. If the values for an app widget's minimum width or height don't match the dimensions of the cells, then the app widget dimensions round up to the nearest cell size. So that's the minimum height and the minimum width. Then you'll also see there's a preview image. So that's the image that gets displayed there when the user tries to use the widget for the first time. And you can see there, it's just this ugly blue example picture. So you can see there it refers to add drawable example app widget preview. So if I go to the drawable folder, you can add your own picture there for that specific widget and just reference it there, and you'll have another picture there. So you can see there's the picture, and it's this same picture that we're seeing there when trying to select the widget. Okay, so that's the widget, or the picture for the widget. Let's just remove it. Right, then we get to the resize mode. Now the resize mode attribute specifies the rules by which a widget can be resized. And you must use this attribute to make home screen widgets resizable horizontally, vertically, or on both axes. So users touch holder widget to basically show its resize handles, and then drag the horizontal or the vertical handles to change the size on the layout grid. And the values for this resize mode, we said it should be resizable horizontal and vertical. So the values that you can choose here will be horizontal, vertical, none, or both of them. And this is basically what we said here. if I drag this to the home screen, we're going to get that example again. And now the user is able to hold on or basically just hold in on it, and then we can resize it vertically and horizontally. Okay, so let's go back again. So then that's the resize mode. Now in the as part of the resize mode, we can also go and say Android, and then we can specify a minimum resize width and a minimum resize height. So then the minimum resize height attribute specifies the minimum height to which the widget can be resized. And this field has no effect if it's greater than the minimum height, or the vertical resizing isn't enabled in your resize mode. So, and then obviously the minimum resize width is the same thing. It specifies the minimum width to which the widget can be resized. And this field has no effect if it's greater than the minimum width or if the horizontal resizing isn't enabled in your resize mode. Now let's go down to the widget category. We'll come back to the update period in milliseconds. The widget category, you'll see that this attribute basically declares whether your app widget can be displayed on the home screen, on the lock screen, which is keyguard, or on both. But only Android versions lower than 5.0 support the lock screen widgets. So for Android 5 and higher, you will basically only use the home screen. So now let's just quickly have a look at the update period in milliseconds. What does this one mean? So this one defines how often the app widget framework should request an update from the app widget provider. And that's the app widget provider class. We're going to get to that class now. And that's by calling the onUpdate callback method. And the actual update is not guaranteed to occur exactly on time with this value. And the Android guys suggest updating as infrequently as possible. Perhaps no more than once an hour to conserve the battery. So you are able to change this value to a lower value. At this stage, that value there is basically 24 hours. So which means that this widget will update every 24 hours. So let's say you've got news stories and you want to get the newest news stories, then you can update it, let's say once a day, this value will then suffice because it's every 24 hours. But if you want to go lower, the lowest value that you can basically use here in this update period in milliseconds, even if I put 2 milliseconds there, the lowest value that we can get there is 30 minutes. So if you want to update your widget less than every 30 minutes, you will need to go and have a look at the Alarm Manager class, which is also explained on that website. Okay, so this is basically the app widget provider and the settings around that. So that's just basically how should your specific widget, how should it behave, and how should it look, and the preview image and the resize mode and so forth. So this is everything in the app widget info. So remember then that your initial layout is there, the configuration activity, and whether it's home screen, when should it update, and so forth. So let's just go back to update period in milliseconds. Let's go to the app widget provider, which is this new app widget. And you can see it extends app widget provider. And inside of this method, you'll see there's the onUpdate method. So if you say here, update period in milliseconds should be 24 hours or 30 seconds, or not 30 seconds, 30 minutes, or whatever your update period in milliseconds is. It means that if I say every 24 hours, it means that every 24 hours it will go to the app widget provider and run this onUpdate method. So you'll see there's a few methods there. There's an update widget, there's an onUpdate method, there's an onDeleted method, onenabled, onDisabled. So this update app widget is the method we use to update the widget. In onUpdate runs. Let's just talk about when onUpdate runs. In your new app widget info, obviously it will run every time that you've indicated it there. But when your app runs right at the start, or your widget runs right at the start, the onUpdate method will run if you do not have this activity, the configuration activity. But if you chose to have the configuration activity, it means that in your configuration activity, you should call or you should update the widget right at the start. So if you do not have a configuration activity, the onUpdate method will run as soon as you drag your widget to the home screen. And then from there, it will run every, let's just go back to that one, every 24 hours, 30 minutes, or whatever you've indicated there. Okay, so this is a very important class, this app widget provider. So in the onUpdate method, you can see there we call update app widget, which is this one, which updates the widget. We're going to do a new video where I go into every single line of coding and explaining what happens. Then, so the onUpdate method will run according to your update period in milliseconds. It will also run if you do not have a configuration activity. It will run right at the start. Okay. Then the onDeleted method, so when the user deletes the method, then you can show a message to the user, thanks for using the widget, or whatever you want to do there. So that this method basically runs as soon as I remove a widget from the home screen. So if I remove it there, that method gets run. Then if I go to onEnabled, basically there's the comment there, enter relevant functionality for when the widget is created first, and when it was disabled or whatever. So this app widget provider has got some useful methods that we can use. So that's the app widget provider. We talked about the info there. We talked about the manifest. We talked about the layout. So let's just go and have a look at the configuration activity. So in the configuration activity, you can see if we just zoom in a bit, this is the layout for the configuration activity. So we just basically ask for some other text there and add it to the widget. So now in that activity, you'll see this activity has got a lot of methods that you can use or you can go without. But basically, the important thing about this configuration activity is that your configuration activity should update your widget. So if you've got a configuration activity, your configuration activity must update your widget. And you can see there it's calling new app widget.update app widget. So going into new app widget again, it calls this method the same as the onUpdate method calls that method. So that's the main thing about your configuration activity that you need to remember, is that if you have a configuration activity, your activity must update your widget the very first time. If you don't update your widget won't get updated at all, unless, or it will only be updated after your update period in milliseconds then. So if you set that to 30 minutes and you drag in your new widget and you haven't updated it in your configuration activity, you will only see your widget or data on your widget after 30 minutes then. So that's very important to remember. Your configuration activity must update your widget. So there they do that. So this is just some sample code that was generated. We'll get to how this works and so forth in the next video. This is just an introduction on how does this thing work. So in the next video, we will do an example of a widget where we will not have a configuration activity, but we'll have a normal widget that starts right from the start, but this widget will read data from an RSS feed. So that's the next video that I'm going to do, maybe in a series of videos, but we'll explain in detail how a widget works and how we can update that widget. Also, how can we, when we run the widget, get some data online and then show it on the widget.